Gonna miss my guys at Enes Kanter and at Doug McDermott. Some of the best guys I've ever been around. See you October 19th.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. This is an unscheduled, unplanned podcast, an emergency podcast, although I hate using that phrase, to discuss the trade that went down, 6 hours ago perhaps, and that is, of course, Carmelo Anthony finally getting out of New York. Not that he necessarily wanted to go for all those years, but here he is now. He's waived his no-trade clause and waived his trade kicker bonus to head across to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, and the Chicago Bulls second-round draft choice, which is going to be a pretty decent second-round pick, given how disgusting the Bulls are going to be, so probably in the 31 to 35 sort of range, I would guess. So we're going to talk about the fantasy fallout from that deal that just went down. So
let's get to it.
All right, I guess I'll give you a quick programming note of what's coming up during the week. What we had last week is we finished off the team previews, so all the team preview shows are done. Tomorrow I'm going to have Kyle McEwen on the show, and we're going to be talking about auction draft strategy, and then during the week there'll be some live mock drafts happening. An auction mock draft at some point, probably a head-to-head mock draft also, a snake draft head-to-head at some point during the week as well, and some other stuff that we've got coming. So they're the main themes, I guess, for next week's run of podcasts. I don't imagine there'll be any emergency trades that need to be discussed for the rest of the off-season, but I guess you never know. But we'll be looking at auction strategy, auction mock drafts, and other mock drafts throughout next week. Let's talk about this Carmelo Anthony deal. I've given you the parameters of the deal. You've all heard those deals. Yes, the Knicks got nothing, but people who thought the Knicks were going to get anything back for Carmelo Anthony were kidding themselves. They were never going to get a significant deal for him. He's not as good as the other superstars that have moved: Kyrie Irving, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, none of those guys. He's not as good as those players. And they just weren't ever going to get a significant haul back. It was never going to be the case. So the Knicks get out of the Carmelo Anthony distraction business. They get themselves, I guess, some weird deals. Doug McDermott, he could be off the books after this season. It's the last year of his rookie contract. He's not very good. And they also got Enes Kanter, who has got 2 years left on his deal, 1 year plus a player option, which he will likely take. The problem that this leaves the Knicks is a number of centers. They've got Kanter there, obviously. Porzingis' best position is center. Also, they have got Joakim Noah, and his contract, he's done. He's just out of the rotation, in my opinion, now. There's Billy Hernan-Gomez, who many people, including myself, are expecting to take a level of a step forward this year. And, of course, big Kylo Quinn at the center position. So there could be some other trades coming here for the Knicks as they try and work out exactly what's happening in this rotation. We will start. We'll start with the Oklahoma City Thunder and how this impacts the Thunder guys, how it impacts the players joining the Thunder, and that's Carmelo Anthony and the players already on the team. There was a word that Trey Burke would be joining this team. He has since backed out of that deal, so he won't be coming across onto the Thunder yet. They don't have an open roster spot, but they probably would have waived a guy like Samaj Kristen in that case to make room for Burke. At this point, they do have the full roster. Interesting. For this team now, getting rid of Enes Kanter, they don't really have a backup center. So we'll start with that first. I think that gives Steven Adams some more playing time. Down the stretch of last season, he was playing like 28, 29 minutes per game. I've bumped him up 1 minute per game, and maybe that's me being a little bit conservative. He could play 32, 33 minutes a game this season, just given the lack of depth behind him. Now, I think we'll see Patrick Patterson play at backup center some of the time, but he is dealing with a knee problem that's required surgery. It wasn't expected to keep him out of the beginning of the season, but they've got, a little bit of a degree of flexibility now with Patterson. They can ease him back if he's not ready, but I think he'll be the backup center at times. I think you'll see some out of Nick Collison, but I wouldn't be relying upon him. But those of you in very, very deep leagues, you're going to want to take a squiz at a guy like, a guy who is exactly Dakari Johnson, a second-round pick from a couple of years ago, who put up some really impressive numbers in the D League over the course of last season. He is on this roster. There was a chance that he wouldn't make the final roster just given the numbers that they had, but now that they've traded away 2 players and only got 1 back in return, I would imagine Dakari makes the final roster, and at some point this season he could find himself in that primary backup center position. As I said, I do imagine Patrick Patterson plays a fair amount of time there. Jeremy Grant will also play some time there as the backup center, but Johnson, for deeper leagues, his level of intrigue has significantly increased now given this trade. And I know that people haven't come to this podcast to hear my Dakari Johnson takes, but it is important to note, last season in the G League, he averaged 18.5 points, 1.3 blocks. He averaged almost 8 rebounds, 2.2 assists, and shot 56% from the field. He also took some threes, didn't hit them very well. He's a decent free throw guy, but those high rebounding, decent scoring numbers, good efficiency numbers, it's going to be something to watch for Dakari on a team who doesn't really have much in terms of centers. I've got 2 guys who have chimed in live. Well, a few people have chimed in live here. Alessandro Ursic and Daniel Evkovic. They said, just tuned in. Do we think PG stats get hurt? Haven't talked about PG yet. And Ursic asked about Porzingis. And we'll talk about him about as well. So all I've talked about is Dakari Johnson, guys. So we'll get to those guys now. Let's talk about Russell Westbrook and how this does impact him. I don't think there's any way that it won't have some impact on him. He was going to drop with the addition of Paul George last season. There was no doubt about that. The addition of Melo is going to impact him, but it's not going to be a significant drop. I've still got him projected to be the number 2 player this year because I think that his efficiency will increase. His bad 2-point shot selection will improve. I think his 2-point percentage goes up. I think that he does change what he does. One thing that will significantly drop, in my opinion, is his rebounding numbers. He won't average a triple-double, in my mind. I think down more to 8 boards per game. That's going to lose some of his value. But if we remember last season, Harden and Westbrook was so far above everybody else that a 25% hit in their value just brings them back to the rest of the field. And now we've got Harden, Westbrook, Durant, Giannis, Towns, all these guys in terms of their overall standard score value. They're all within, I think, 0.06 of those top 5 guys. So people ask, who you take number 1, who you take number 2. In the end, it doesn't really matter. There's just so much similarity. You could make the argument, we're not sure how it will affect Russ. We're not sure how it will affect Harden. KD might rest some more games. How does Butler affect Towns? And Giannis is the only one with a set, I guess, with a more secure role that we know what it's going to be. And that's your reasoning. Take Giannis at 1. And I've got no problem. If you said I'll take Giannis at 1, Towns at 1, Durant at 1, Harden at 1, Westbrook at 1, none of those answers are incorrect at this point. They are all so close. So this does drop Westbrook. It drops his rebounding a little bit more. It increases his field goal percentage. It drops his points. Now, for about a period of about 3 days, I did have Westbrook back at number 1, just with a marginal decrease in James Harden's free throw attempt rate with the new rules about those free throws that he tends to draw. And I don't think it's going to affect him a massive chunk, but they were so close that I think it was a drop of maybe 1 free throw attempt per game for Harden. Actually push Westbrook to number 1, but now the addition of Anthony has pushed Westbrook down to number 2 with a marginal drop in his rebounds, a marginal drop in his points, and an increase in his field goal percentage. But they're all so close to each other that it is really, really nitpicky to say who's number 1, who's number 2. In the end, your first round pick is not going to decide what happens to your team. It's what you do after that that's really important. So anyone who's sitting there at pick 1 or pick 2 and really stressing, don't worry about it. And I know that sounds dumb coming from someone who talks about fantasy basketball for a living, just saying, don't give a shit, take whoever you want. But in this case, there's no clear-cut answer there. Any of these guys can go there. It's what you do later on that has a significantly greater impact than who you pick in the top 5. It's significantly different. As for Paul George, again, it's a marginal drop, an increase in his efficiency, a slight decrease in his points. That's sort of where he is, a strong second-round player, in my opinion. I don't think we've got a clear hierarchy here. Westbrook's the best player. Paul George is the second best player. Melo's the third best player. If anyone's taking a large hit, it's going to be Melo. But we're going to see Andre Robertson is not going to touch it. Steve Adams won't touch it. These guys will get staggered. So you'll see Westbrook and George together. You'll see Westbrook and Anthony together. And you'll see them being used that way. There's no great abundance of playmakers on the second unit. We're going to be talking about Pat Patterson, Alex Abrines, Jeremy Grant, and Ray Felton running that second unit. Whichever of these big 3 runs with that second unit, they will get well in excess of what they would do in that starting lineup. So that's going to help their numbers. So George drops a little bit, but it's not a significant drop-off in my opinion. The drop in points is offset by an increase in efficiency. He won't play much at the 4. I think Melo is going to be exclusively at the 4 for this team, which is absolutely fantastic because that is his best position. And we should be pretty excited about that as a Carmelo Anthony, if you're a Carmelo Anthony fan. And he gets a lot of shit. I actually like Melo. I don't have any problem with him. I think that he's a decent player. And he gets a lot of hate that I'm just not really into. Melo, on the other hand, he's still... And someone said to me on basketball once, "Oh, you hate Carmelo Anthony," and they said, "Despite the fact that you hate him, we're really optimistic." I don't hate him at all. Don't hate him whatsoever. And they go, "Oh, you put all these downside, bust, risky labels," and that's because I didn't know if he was going to get traded. So picking him at his ADP, which was like 49 or 45, was significantly risky. I don't think that anyone could deny that taking him at that pick inside the top 50 before we knew where he was going to go or if he was going to go was a significantly risky decision. Now we know where he's going to go. We know where he's gone. And it still makes him, at pick 49, a bad pick. I think he is more a guy that's outside the top 60, but inside the top 75. That's totally fine, in my opinion, to have him in that range. But his ADP is at 49. Now, I do think that he will drop now in drafts, and unless they're auto drafters. His ADP is not 49, it's 44 and 40 on ESPN. So it's too high. But I think you'll find him falling, and if he falls to 60, I think it's fine. I don't think he's going to crack 20 points per game, but I think he'll be a pretty strong rebounder. He'll hit his shots again at an increased efficiency. He gets his threes. I think that he'll be solid in this mid-round area. And I don't think there's anything wrong with selecting Carmelo Anthony. He's not going to be worse than 75th, I don't believe. There's a chance he cracks the top 50. It's not a high one, but there is a chance of that. I don't think there's too much to be... It is a dip from what he was going to do in New York, but it's not a massive dip. I don't think it's a significant change, really, for him moving to OKC. It is to a degree. Don't get me wrong. There is a drop. I've dropped his field goal attempts, and that's one thing we also have to remember. In all of this, you'll hear the talk. Oh, usage is going to drop. He's going to lose his usage, and Porzingis, man, his usage is going to go up. Do we remember what usage is? Again, I've got to stress this. Usage is a formula that calculates what percentage of a team's possessions you use. And the way that you can use a possession is in 3 ways. A field goal attempt, so a shot, a free throw attempt, or a turnover. Those 3 things impact your usage. So the player's usage might go up. It does nothing to their rebounding. It does nothing to their assists. It does nothing to their steals. It does nothing to their blocks. It doesn't do anything concrete to their field goal or free throw percentage. Yes, it increases those attempts, but if they're bad at field goal percentage, it actually makes them worse in that category. If they're bad at free throw percentage, it makes it worse at that category with that increase there. Does it increase their three-pointers? Maybe, but not definitely. They could increase their usage while decreasing their three-point attempt rate. So the only thing that usage does is means more shots and more turnovers. That's what increase in usage does. So we'll talk about this all the time. So yeah, Melo will lose some usage, but his other numbers should stay similar. I don't think he's going to be an exceptionally strong rebounder and putting up huge rebound numbers or anything along those lines, but he very well could go back to getting 7 or 8 boards per game. I don't think that's a crazy number to expect from Carmelo Anthony. I think he could do that, especially playing at the 4. I'd expect his rebound rate to significantly increase this season as opposed to what we've seen the last couple of years. But it is really important because you are going to see lots of discussion about usage rate regarding this. We've got Joel Mills says, what are your thoughts on a small ball 5-out lineup of Westbrook, Abrines, George, Melo, and Patterson? They're going to use it a lot. Patterson's going to be that backup 5. George and Melo at the 3 and 4 is going to be their standard lineup. And Abrines replacing Roberson. They'll use that. They could close games with that lineup really, really easily. I think they'll use it quite a bit, in fact. So yeah, that's a pretty decent comment to bring up there, Joel. Who else have we got to talk about? Steve Adams, I said I think he gets an extra minute just because there aren't really any other centers on this team. That just increases his numbers marginally. A few more blocks potentially, bigger impact from his field goal percentage, and more negatives on his free throws. Rebound numbers go up a little bit. It makes him a solid inside the top 100 center who has his limitations but can be useful in certain situations. And you've got to remember that getting solid centers can be hard to do, but he's going to have a significant negative impact in the free throw percentage category, and you've got to either be punting that category or have built up such a strong buffer in that zone that it doesn't really matter to you. So he is going to see, I think, an extra minute. It might give him an extra 5 spots of fantasy value. Not much. Not a big deal there. Andre Robertson, not a fantasy producer whatsoever. He's going to start at the 2. He's going to get some steals and blocks. I don't think too much changes there with Robertson. Robertson. So I would be expecting him to put up those similar numbers. Not much changes. good stream option for defensive numbers, good deeper league sort of player. That's about it. Patrick Patterson, his minutes definitely fall. He would have been playing 29 to 30 in my opinion. That's not going to be the case now. So he drops right down. But even in 29 to 30, he was not a standard league contributor whatsoever. Now I think he's probably a stretch even for a 16-team league situation. He'll play probably mid-20s in minutes behind Melo and behind Steve Adams. And he just doesn't do much. He can hit some threes. He does not a strong rebounder. He's not a volume scorer. He's not a good defensive stats guy. He's just not a very good fantasy option whatsoever. Jeremy Grant, I think, gets a little bit of extra playing time as he plays at center a little bit more. Obviously, it's going to come down to his shooting as to how useful he can be, but he is still a deeper league guy, while my man, Alex Abrines, who I thought could be a level of a breakout guy, could be, especially with Doug McDermott gone. He comes in, I think he fits the sixth man role perfectly for this team, and that gives him an option. And he could be one of my favorite guys to talk about, the 2 3-pointers per game stream options, the Uncle P Nick Youngs, the Wayne Allingtons, the Troy Daniels, who also got traded to Phoenix. And there are some minutes there for Phoenix and Daniels now with Brandon Knight gone for the season and Devon Reed gone for the majority of the season. So Troy Daniels is definitely going to continue to be a 3-point streamer. Abrines is going to be that guy as well, but his ability to fully break out, I think the handbrake has been put on that a little bit here by Melo, but definitely someone to pay attention to as a semi-breakout sort of guy. The other one I talked about already for OKC was Dakari Johnson, who gets some extra playing time. Not much else really changes here for this team. I think that's about it when we're looking at the OKC Thunder. Let's take a look at the New York Knicks and what happens here. And everyone's going to be really, really keen to give the old rusty trombone to Kristaps Porzingis now. And I understand that completely because you're going to hear this is Porzingis' team, this is his team now. And all that stuff is true, right? He is the main guy here on this squad. We know that. His usage is going to increase. We know that. But as I said earlier, that doesn't mean he's grabbing 10 boards per game. That doesn't mean his block numbers are changing. It doesn't mean he's going to be more efficient. In fact, he's likely going to be a little bit less efficient than what we predicted him to be. Now, I thought he'd take a significant jump forward in his efficiency this season. I don't think that he will take as large a step forward this season, given the fact that he is going to be the number one guy and have more attention on him. And for as much shit as we give Melo, I think Melo was actually good for Porzingis. I think Derrick Rose wasn't, but I think that Melo was helpful for Porzingis here. I still think he's going to exceed last season's numbers pretty comfortably. I don't think that's a real big concern that he's going to be able to do that. I'm pretty confident that he will be able to do that. But it's how is the efficiency going to go? He did, over the last 3 months of last season, shoot 52% from 2, which is a significant upgrade in what he'd done for the rest of the season. But that extra stress on him, I think, might just dip that down a little bit this season. Still above last year's numbers, but not quite as high as I was expecting him to go. I was expecting him, or I had him projected as a 46.5% field goal percentage guy for this season. I'm not sure that he gets to that level, maybe down to 46. That's not a big dip, but it is a significant dip. I think he averages over 20 points a game, but again, we're not thinking that his rebounds are changing or his block numbers are changing. And the question is going to continue to be asked, do you want Kristaps or do you want Miles Turner? And the answer is going to be Kristaps is probably going to get more points than him, and he's going to hit more threes. Miles Turner is going to get you higher field goal percentage. Which one of those two do you want? Now, with Melo leaving, I think the extra points that Porzingis gets probably pushes it a little bit higher in his direction just because points are such a hard category to find. So I think that pushes them a little bit towards Porzingis there. But that's the main trade-off you're looking at is field goal percentage versus threes for Turner and Porzingis, and it really depends on how you're looking at your team. But those extra points that Kristaps is getting probably just helps him a little bit more at this point. But he is now the unquestioned star on this team. It's going to be how that... Look, if his efficiency goes up, he starts hitting 49% of his twos, 49% of his shots altogether, then he becomes a top 15 type of player who could average 25 a game, and that's not without a chance of happening. But there is that risk that he does lose a bit of efficiency with the extra shot attempts that he's going to be taking, and that does impact him. Enes Kanter comes across and joins this team, and they do have the 4 centers, Bill Hernan-Gomez, Joakim Noah, Kyle O'Quinn, and of course Porzingis' best position is at center as well. I think that Kanter starts. And people have a very negative opinion of Enes Kanter, and someone wrote today on the Basketball Monster 4, he's a bum. He's not a bum. He's an exceptional offensive player. He is one of the top 3 rebounders in the entire NBA, and he's probably a top 5 offensive post-play player in the NBA. He is that good. In the 14-15 season when Kevin Durant was out, he was a top 30 player after he joined the Oklahoma City Thunder. Him and Russ were wrecking shit all over the place. He was pretty much unstoppable. Now, I don't think he's going to be at that level because I don't think he's going to play 30 minutes a night. But to me, he will start and he will play more minutes than Bill Hernan-Gomez, and obviously considerably more than O'Quinn and Joakim Noah. For rotisserie leagues, Kanter is exceptional value, high volume field goal percentage, decent volume free throw percentage, points and rebounds, really valuable. The steals and blocks, they're not going to be high. We know that. But you know who else doesn't have high steals and blocks? Bill Hernan-Gomez. And I have continually said this. Hernan-Gomez is a worse version than Enes Kanter. That's the way that you should be looking at him. And obviously I still clearly believe that. And now they're on the same team. So when we go and have a look at this, who is going to get this starting job? I think it's Kanter. And I think he becomes a very, very interesting late round pick just for those abilities alone. He's not going to block any shots. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit, really? Was Bill Hernan-Gomez going to come out and block 1.5 shots? The answer to that's no, he wasn't. He was going to do what Kanter does, worse. That's as simple as what that is. So just think of those two as the same play. Now, as for Hernan-Gomez, still a draftable player. I think he still gets 24 to 25 minutes instead of the 26 to 27 I was expecting. I think this takes Noah pretty much out of the rotation. I think it takes Koch pretty much out of the rotation as well. And they'll be running those two with Porzingis at center some of the time. So it does hurt Bill's value, and it does help Kanter's value significantly. I think that he's going to put up some okay numbers. Tim Hardaway Jr., I think he gets a pretty significant rise in his usage as well. But he is a player whose majority of his value does come from points and from threes. And getting those extra shots is going to help his value. It's not going to change his assists too much. I think he does play a little bit of point guard on this team who's lacking a point guard. But I think he's going to get more shots. His efficiency may suffer, but I think that he is a strong late pick now as well who definitely gains around maybe 2 rounds of value. At this point, I would assume Courtney Lee starts at the 3. Now, a lot of people will be ready to get on the Michael Beasley train. I'm not. He's not good. Courtney Lee's not that good either, but I think that Lee will start at the 3 alongside Timmy Hardaway. He is also not a very good fantasy player, Big Courtney. So I wouldn't be getting overly excited about drafting him. He's a great 14-team league guy with your 10th pick or 12th pick or something like that because he's solid in that zone, but the upside's not high. In a 12-teamer, if you're going to pick him at pick 130, I'd rather get a high upside guy because Courtney Lee doesn't have that upside. He doesn't have any real level of upside, to be honest. He just is what he is. He's a decent efficiency guy who gets some steals and hits some threes, but doesn't do any of that at significantly high volume. It's the efficiency that's nice. He gets to the line very minimally, hits them, but doesn't get there really at all, and that takes away a degree of his value there also. As for B, they've also got other small forwards. Doug McDermott comes in. Are they going to want to see what they get from him? I'll tell you what you're going to get from him. Nothing for fantasy. Absolutely nothing. So don't think, he's going to be a sneaky late round pick, because even if he averages 16 points a game, which is a huge stretch, he will probably average a combined 4 rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks combined. And there's just no value in him there. They've got Mick Beasley. They've got Lance Thomas. They've got Mindaugas Kuzminska. Shout out Lance Thomas for following me on Twitter. And they've got Doug McDermott as well. Now, those guys will play the 3 behind Courtney Lee. They'll also play the 4 behind Porzingis because there is no other power forward on this team. So that is something to pay a level of attention to. There is no other power forward. Now, will they try and run Hernan-Gomez and Kanter out there together? Maybe, because they're bad, but that's a horrible combination. So I think you're going to see some Beasley at the 4. I think you're going to see some McDermott at the 4, which is probably his best position, to be honest. You're going to see some Thomas and Kuzminskas at the 4, and some of those guys in those combinations. We will see that happen. But I don't think it makes Beasley a standard league player. Although, if I'm taking a flyer on someone, it is going to be Beasley over Thomas, over Kuzminskas, over McDermott. Because he could average 14 points per game in 25 minutes. I think I've got him averaging 10 points in 18, but he could average more than that. He's an okay rebounder. The defensive numbers aren't awesome from Beasley, but he could be okay. So I would be fine with taking a late round pick on him. As I said, I believe O'Quinn and Noah will be now out of the rotation. With the trading of Melo, does it increase the likelihood that Frank Ntilikina starts the season much earlier than what we anticipated? Yeah, I believe it does. And if he shows a level of competence throughout October, I think he starts in November. I think that we still have Ramon Sessions as the starting point guard, but I think that by December, Sessions is probably out of the rotation completely, and Ntilikina starts with rugged Ronnie Baker as his backup. If Ntilikina shows, he doesn't need to be good. He just needs to show that he is not horrendous. And I think by November, December, Ntilikina should be starting now. And that makes him an okay flyer pick in those last rounds just to see how he goes for those first couple more. Shit, they might even see him in preseason and go, right, First night you're starting, very similar to what they did with Porzingis when Phil Jackson was coming out prior to that season saying, oh, we're going to go slow. We'll probably play 23 minutes a night. And then he played like 29 a night and killed it in his rookie season. I don't think Frank is the same player, clearly, but he could very easily begin the season as the starting point guard. So there is a level of value that's increased there with Ntilikina. As I said, Kuzminskas gets a bit of a bump, Lancey Thomas gets a bit of a bump, and McDirt gets somewhat of a bump, but he's just such a putrid fantasy player that it's not going to have really much of an impact on these guys at all. The big winners here, Kanter, Hardaway, Lee, Beasley, Porzingis to a lesser degree, and the loser here is Bill Hernan-Gomez, in my opinion. Other trades could be coming. Maybe Kanter is moved on at some point in another deal. Maybe Courtney Lee gets moved on as well. Then that really does open things up for Beasley and guys like Doug McDermott there also, as much as we don't love McDermott from a fantasy point of view, but some value could be opening up with those guys. So there is a lot of stuff to really look at with this trade. If changes, all the updates have been made on Basketball Monster, so you can see how all the projections have panned out. Go and check out. I've made these adjustments as more news and more information comes out over the coming days. I will update things. If there's reports on the Knicks are planning on doing this, or moving Kanter, or starting Bill Hernan-Gomez, or starting Beasley over Lee, those adjustments will be made. But for now, this is the way I think it's going to go. We're going to have Courtney Lee starting. We're going to have him playing about 30 minutes a night, and then we'll see how these other guys start to work in. But there will be more information of this stuff coming out over the coming days and weeks, and all that stuff will be updated over on Basketball Monster. But remember, usage does not equal fantasy value all the time. It's points. It's the points category. That's what generally happens with usage. You increase your points. You amplify your impact in the field goal and free throw percentage category, whether that's good or bad. Everything else, who knows what goes on. Usage is not how often you have the ball in your hands. It's how often you finish a possession. So the assists don't change. It does nothing for your defensive numbers. It doesn't impact your rebounds. Just remember that when you go to say something, or someone goes to say, Porzingis usage through the roof, doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean everything. And there are lots of factors to consider here. All right, I think we're done for this emergency Carmelo Anthony fantasy ramifications trade breakdown podcast. Tomorrow I'll be back. I might get Kyle's quick thoughts on it tomorrow as well. He will update his projections on Basketball Monster also. But we're going to be talking auction strategy tomorrow, so make sure you are tuned in for that. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and tune in, and also on Spotify, and leave a 5-star review. It is a great way of helping out the program as well. Get it out there for more people, and get its name in front of more sponsors and potential sponsors to help the show keep growing. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Josh Hustis.